Also, my nurse midwife had said, well, at least next time, that you can schedule a C-section. And I was just like so heartbroken.
Oh, that was the suggestion.
Yes. So unheard, so I
Yeah.
validated. And so knowing most likely if I wanted to stay in Santa Barbara, what would have to happen with the VBAC ban at the hospital, like I didn't even really want to think about having another baby. And I was definitely had to go through some emotional healing, around my birth experience with Koa.
Hello, and welcome to the VBAC Facts podcast. I'm Jen Campbell, VBAC Facts founder. Today we have with us Denise Jaimes-Villanueva. She's going to share with us her experience of navigating a VBAC ban in Santa Barbara, California. Denise is the mother of 2 boys, ages 12 and 9. She was born in Santa Barbara and raised in Carpinteria. She is proud of her Mexican heritage. She spent a couple of years living on Maui. Her husband, boys, and her love to travel, go to sporting events, amusement parks, be in nature, and spend time with friends and family. She is a bilingual psychologist working with children, adolescents, couples, and families. She has a number of specialties that she is passionate about, including working with the Latinx community, often incorporating cultural concepts into treatment as a way to heal and grow. These concepts include connecting to our traditions and values, as well as learning how intergenerational trauma and ancestral wisdom impact us, supporting those that have suffered from childhood trauma and domestic violence, and working with young children and their caregivers to increase attachment. Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So glad to be here.
I would love to start with your first birth. Can you kind of walk us through what happened in that pregnancy and labor?
We were very excited, obviously, like many new parents are, first-time parents. We were also a one-income family at that time. I was finishing up school, and my husband was the only income earner at that time. So, kind of trying to do things in a responsible way, too. I always knew, I was drawn to home births and natural births, and that's what I wanted. However, after discussing with my husband about the finances and his concerns, our agreed upon plan was, let's do a hospital birth this time. It's going to basically be covered by insurance. And if all goes well, maybe the next birth we can try to have a home birth and we'll know what to expect and what it's going to be like. And so disappointingly, I agreed. I said, okay, that's fine. But we still went ahead and enrolled ourselves in natural birthing classes and still were hoping to go along that path in the hospital. And again, cutting corners financially, we didn't hire an experienced doula to support us, as again, I had initially wanted, but my friend had given natural birth herself a couple of times and had also supported one of her friends have a natural birth. And she was willing to take some doula classes. And so I said, okay, well, that sounds good enough. That sounds like a good plan. I was just surrounding myself, like I said, with that natural birthing class. And I was doing a prenatal yoga class with a very knowledgeable yoga instructor on all things natural birthing. And so I had a lot of support around that. I thought it would be easy peasy. We were excited and I went into labor on my due date, but it was very early labor, probably in reality, like Braxton Hicks contractions. And I just didn't know it. And
so at the time you were thinking, this is it.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, you're like, probably not.
Yeah, in retrospect, for sure. The time, and I was also a part of a medical team of OB-GYNs. And so I didn't know who I was going to get, but I knew that the person I preferred was on call that night. And so it was just like, yes, this is it, and it's happening on the person I want. And so we went to the hospital, my friend / doula with us, and way too early. There was no dilating and too much time in between contractions. And so we said, okay, we'll go home. And so we went home and I did my best to just rest. And the next day it seemed to, we were trying to time the contractions and it seemed like they were closer. And so we made that call again to let's get to the hospital. And they said, well, it's not really dilating. If anything, it's very little. Why don't you take a walk around the hospital and, see if what happens. And I think at that time they had said, you can probably just go back home. And at that point, I was just like, I just want to stay here. I don't want to keep coming back and forth. And they allowed me to do so. And so I just thought I was going to labor calmly and, just progress naturally there in the hospital. And in hindsight, again, I had wished I had gone home to do that because then I just started feeling lots of pressure, nothing's happening and, we can get the ball rolling doing these interventions. And I didn't want to do any medical interventions. And so I held off for a long time after consulting with a doula that had visited, I think, the prenatal yoga class. Or maybe that birthing class, and then also with my yoga instructor and my birthing instructor, they were trying to be really supportive over the phone. But, I was there with my mom, my sister, my husband, and my friend. And, obviously some medical interventions have worked to get it going for some people. And so it's just like, well, it's worth a try. Let's try one thing, And so the one that I had chosen to do first, I think, was the Pitocin to just get the contractions a little stronger.
And how long had you been in labor, or how long had it been since the first time you went to the hospital? Just to get an idea of how much time had elapsed here.
I want to say 2 days because
Yeah.
So the first day I went was on the 13th, and then he wasn't born until the 16th. So
wow.
it was a long time.
So were you able to sleep during those 2 days, or were you really kind of like excited and up and?
I think a little bit of both. Yeah, I mean, I was more excited and up than restful for sure.
Yeah.
And then getting discouraged, I was in and out of the bathtub trying to relax and, just getting really discouraged and concerned about how long it was taking. And so that's when I thought to myself, like, yeah, maybe just let's get these contractions pumped up and see if this baby wants to move around. And so that was intense, without having any pain medication or anything else. But it felt good to me, it felt like my body was working and that something was happening with the contractions. And still no progression with dilation.
And how dilated were you when they started the Pitocin? Do you recall?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to say maybe 2, 3, something like that. It was very low. And then, the pain got really intense. And, because I wasn't progressing, I was getting exhausted. And so, it was a very hard decision to get the epidural because, I had also heard that all these things can slow labor down. They could certainly help, but they can also slow labor down. And I was so worried about that because it had already been so long. But I was pretty exhausted and I needed some rest. So I made that challenging and difficult decision to get the epidural. And, I guess one person was only allowed in there. And I decided to have my mom with me. She's very comforting. And so she held me while I got the epidural. And it was kind of nice to get some rest. I was able to relax and rest. And I thought maybe that's just what I need, just to be patient and chill out. And, this baby will come soon. And I think that night, one of the nurses had given us maybe false hope and said that I had dilated. I was maybe at a 4.5 or 5 or something like that. And I was like, yay, it's happening at least, slowly.
Yeah.
And then the next doctor on call came in and he said, oh, well, they were being generous. You were only at a 2 or something like that. And I don't know. So that was very disappointing. And at that point, too, a little later on in his shift, I think he had mentioned that he was concerned about my baby's heart rate. I can't remember if it was a little too fast or a little slow, maybe a little slow, and that it seemed that there was also some meconium as well. And so he
Because
was
your water
concerned
had
about that.
broken at that point?
No, it hadn't.
Okay. Oh, so he was
Maybe
just
they,
saying he was worried about meconium, not that he actually saw meconium.
yeah, because my water didn't
Okay.
break. That was another, I did actually, they did break my water as well. You reminded me of that. Was another intervention that I was like,
Okay.
hesitant. I had so wanted that natural, experience of that happening. And so maybe he did actually see it because they did break my water at one point as well. I totally
Okay.
forgot about that. Uh,
I know it's funny how once
and
you start thinking about something, things that you
yeah,
never even thought about or had thought you'd forgotten of start coming
yeah,
up.
I know. I knew I was going to cry today, but I didn't know it
Oh,
was going to be about that. But I just remember that feeling very, out of all the interventions, that one felt like so violating. It's just like, I don't know why necessarily, but like I said, I think I had so anticipated. You see in the movies, like, oh my God, my water broke. um, and so, yeah, that was probably, I mean, the epidural was hard too, but that one was probably one of the hardest. Like, um, I don't know why. I felt like maybe I was forcing my baby to come out before he was ready. It- with that intervention. So that one was, maybe that's why I blocked it out. But I don't know.
yeah.
So yeah, the doctor was concerned about his heart rate, the meconium. And then also I think my strength, had been so long and I wasn't dilating. And then he also had finally let me know that my baby was sunny side up as well. So that was making for hard back labor and just challenging overall. And so, my husband was starting to get concerned once he heard the doctor's concern about our baby. And so, it had been so long. And so I kind of just decided, okay, let's have the C-section, totally like not what I wanted, but I'm so
Yeah.
tired and so like can't wait to meet this baby. Um, and so we were wheeled in pretty quickly after I made the decision finally to get in there. And everyone was pretty friendly for the most part, I think. And Eli was able to claim the sex of the baby. The doctor, showed him, what do we have here, Dad? So that was exciting. Um, and Eli stayed with our son the whole time as I was wheeled to recovery and stuff. It seemed like forever. That was another regret. I still wanted that. Uh, I was able to see him and nuzzle him a little right away, but I still wanted that initial like bonding and skin on skin with him. And instead he was, taken away, and I didn't get to see him for what seemed like forever, but I don't think it was that long. So yeah, that's kind of things that happened around his birth and what made it challenging. I kind of think um, having experienced support, like I had originally wanted midwife and an experienced doula. I think that maybe that could have helped. I think having the medical interventions maybe perhaps slowed things down as well, going into early being too excited and impatient and yeah, all those things.
So after your C-section, was a next child, your next pregnancy, even on your mind? At what point did you start thinking about what you wanted for your next
Yeah.
pregnancy?
Yeah, definitely. My husband and I had always wanted multiple children. And so I think we knew we wanted another baby before we had our first even, and before we were pregnant with our first, as was said, the next time we could try a home birth, after this hospital. But right after I had him, I definitely went into I mean, some depression, and had some a hard time. And so with that, it wasn't necessarily on my mind. In the hospital also, my nurse midwife had said, well, at least next time, that you can schedule a C-section. And I was just like so heartbroken.
Oh, that was,
So
that was the suggestion.
yes. So unheard, so I
Yeah.
validated. And so knowing most likely if I wanted to stay in Santa Barbara, what would have to happen, because that's what everyone was with the VBAC ban at the hospital. Like I didn't even really want to think about having another baby. And I was definitely like had to go through some emotional healing, around my birth experience with COA. I don't know how much longer I had more of a solid, you know, heart feeling like, yeah, I'm ready to have another baby. They're 2.5 years apart. So I think it was always in the back of my mind. Like I knew it, but I just wasn't ready to like think about it right after I had COA. But when we were trying for our second child, I want to say maybe a year and a half later or something, I knew that I wanted to have a different experience. And I was a little bit more confident and maybe firm with Eli, that I want to have midwives and, I want to labor at home, want to have a VBAC. And he was supportive of all that. And I forgot to mention that I had COA about a month before I had him. I defended my dissertation and I got my doctorate degree. And
Goodness.
when I got pregnant with my second child, I wasn't licensed yet. And I was just like, yes, my boys are my motivation. Well, I didn't know as he was a boy at the time, but, my babies are my motivation. I got my doctorate with COA and I'm going to get licensed before I have my second child. But I had to stop studying because I put all my energy, like emotional energy and time, into pursuing a VBAC. At the time, it really felt like I was reinventing the wheel. Like I felt so alone.
Yeah.
I didn't know you existed, at that time. And or maybe I did. I don't remember. Things are blurry.
Well, I
no,
know,
just
I know we met one time at one of the ICANN of Santa Barbara panels.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember when that was. I should have looked up when that was. I think that was maybe I think it was the first panel I did with them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know what year that
Yeah, it
was.
was.
I think you already had your second child by that point.
Yeah, I think I
When
did as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was pregnant with my second child, the ICANN Santa Barbara chapter didn't exist. I think there had been one in Ventura that I reached out to, but they had just recently dismantled. And so I did find some midwives, though, that were very knowledgeable and supportive. But because of the politics, it wasn't even necessarily a recommendation. It was like necessary for them to have a doctor backup, for their hospital birth. And I don't even think that home birth was an option for me at that time either. Like I think they were willing to have me labor at home and then transfer me to the hospital with a VBAC friendly doctor.
And can I just jump in and can you share what are the politics of VBAC at that time in Santa Barbara? Because I think what has happened in Santa Barbara is so similar to what happens to other communities around the country. And so can you just like lay out what were the VBAC options in Santa Barbara?
To my knowledge, there weren't any really, because the only hospital that we have had a VBAC ban. And so, yeah, I was told that, it's my right to say that didn't want any interventions. I didn't want a C-section, but that it would be very challenging. I'd be up against people that were very judgmental and that would try to pressure me. And so that didn't sound easy or fun. And that was a bummer because my husband and I and our firstborn were all born at that hospital. And,
Yeah.
it would have been so beautiful to be able to, have that kind of tradition or experience with our second and last baby too. I was willing to kind of do what it took to do what my body and heart wanted. So it seemed like there wasn't really anybody in Santa Barbara that was willing to get on board with that necessarily.
Yeah.
Um,
And my understanding is that Cottage Hospital is a level 1 trauma center. So that's where gunshot victims would go. That's where car accidents would go. I mean, that is the hospital for the community. So for them not to offer VBAC, what did that mean in terms of how far you would need to travel if you wanted to birth in a hospital?
yeah, so that would be in Ventura County. And even then, they were kind of going through some changes and, who was VBAC friendly, who wasn't, and who wanted to be and who couldn't. Um, and so beyond that, I mean, more of a guaranteed place would be like LA, like at UCLA, where people have had some success stories. And I have one of my best friends and cousins that lives right down the street from the Ventura Hospital. And so I decided to labor at her house and be transferred to, which at the time was going to be St. John's Hospital, because that's where the VBAC friendly doctor I decided to go with worked out of. He also worked out of the community hospital in Ventura. But prior to that, I was going to be working with a lovely doctor who was mostly working out of Santa Paula. So that was quite a trek for me too. When I first started seeing her,
And what are all the distances here? So people understand, like, what's the difference from Santa Barbara to Ventura, or if you wanted to go to UCLA or going up to Santa Paula? How many miles and how long did it take you to travel when you were looking at your options?
yeah, I can't remember exactly, but from Santa Barbara to Ventura is the closest. And that's probably like anywhere between a half an hour to 40 minutes. And then Santa Paula is pretty way out there. I would say about a good hour maybe to get there. And then UCLA, I mean, that one's more tricky because there's so much traffic all the time. And so that's was also intimidating, thinking about being in labor and in traffic. That could be a couple of hours away or
Yeah.
more,
And versus Cottage, how far was Cottage from your house?
like 10 minutes, if
Yeah.
even that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were going up to this doctor in Santa Paula.
Yeah. And she was on board. She was totally, I mean, VBAC friendliest of all the friendlies, just wanted to support me and was happy to do so. And shortly after seeing her, she was pressured by the board of her hospital and told that if I don't know exactly, but that she would basically lose her license if they found that she was backing up any midwives or, offering VBAC services. So, I totally get that she didn't want to lose what she had worked so hard for and doing what she loved and is great at, for this political wall that she was against. So she regretfully, had to end providing services to me. And then I was starting from like all over again, trying to find somebody. And at the time I did have my midwives, so seeing them regularly. But they needed that doctor backup. And so I was still open to trying to have a home birth. And I was able to get in touch with Dr. Fishbein, who's one of the only doctors that was, or OB-GYNs that's doing home births. And so I was really excited when I made, connection with him and we spoke and he was willing to support me. He didn't already have, patients or many at that time of my due date. And so I was really excited when I went back to tell my midwives, I found my doctor, and I don't know if it was because it wasn't a hospital option with my midwives. I can't remember, but the head midwife had recommended I seek somebody else that works in a hospital. And so she recommended somebody in Ventura, this doctor that was at St. John's and the community hospital. And so he also, was available. And because that's who my midwife had wanted me to go with, I decided, okay, well, I'll go with him then, I guess, thinking it was going to be, again, kind of easy. I mean, he was VBAC friendly and supportive. He knew that I wanted to have a VBAC, and so he was, secretively open to that idea. And so my plan was, like I said, to labor at my cousin's house. St. John's was a little bit further away from my cousin's house because I think it's in Oxnard. My cousin lives in Ventura, her house is just down the street from community and county hospital. They're both kind of in the same vicinity. And St. John's was a little bit further away. But so with my second child, I went into labor on the 4th of May. I remember getting to my cousin's house and, getting comfortable. She would send her kids off, and it was one of her son's birthday on May the 4th. And so they were celebrating in the morning. And I mean, she just has a beautiful, cozy home. And I was comfortable there laboring in her bathtub and in her backyard with the yoga ball and in the bedroom and showering off and on. And my midwives were coming in and checking on me. And, at one point, there was a team of 3. At one point, there was one of them said, okay, well, I think we're getting ready for hospital transfer. It's happening. And so it's like, okay. So we called our doctor to give him a heads up. And he's just said he was supporting another first-time mom at the community hospital just down the street from my cousin's. And he wasn't going to be able to be at St. John's, which is where he was willing to support my VBAC. I guess community wasn't VBAC friendly, or even though he was working there. I was still a little confused by that. But so he gave us our options, which were to get in the car, go to UCLA, or
Oh my goodness.
or go to the county hospital, which had been known to be VBAC friendly in the past, which is where my initial doctor was working. And so it's scary. I didn't want to be in traffic going to UCLA when I was almost ready to transfer to the hospital. It's so unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's going to take.
I think people outside of Southern California need to understand, what does it mean to drive from Ventura to UCLA? I mean, you could easily be driving for 3 or 4 hours, because if it's during traffic and you're stuck, you are stuck on the freeway. That is not ideal if you are in labor.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. It's not just like, let me drive 30 miles down the road and I go to another hospital. I mean, it's almost like you're driving to Las Vegas. It's so far because it takes so long with traffic. So your options were to roll the dice and get in the car and sit for possibly 3 or 4 hours going to UCLA, or
just go like 5 minutes down the street, if even that, to Ventura County Hospital, to the ER. And so I decided to do that. That sounded more safe to me,
okay,
not as stressful.
Because this was, let me just back up. Because this was always the plan, right? It was always the plan to labor at home with the midwives and then go to the hospital for the actual delivery.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's not like there was anything wrong. You were just transferring because this was the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wasn't transferring with a doctor I knew, or, who I knew was supportive. And,
yeah.
So there was a twist in there. And then I still, I'm sure it was explained to me, but I still don't really recall why my midwives weren't willing. Maybe it was a political thing too. Why they weren't willing to help me have a home birth and be transferred to hospital if needed, But yeah, that was always kind of.
Okay.
That was always what they had said was necessary if I wanted to have them. And so, yeah, we went in the morning to the county hospital, and my midwife had said, I'm no longer able to say I'm your midwife. I have to, you could say I'm your doula. So I got there and I told them I'm in labor and I wanted to be checked in to have my baby. And so they told me where, I had to do all the check-in paperwork and stuff, but then they told me where I had to go. And so I walked there and met with the staff up at the labor and delivery area and told them, I want to have a VBAC. I'm here to have a VBAC, and was met with judgmental faces and judgmental words, and them telling me that that's not legal and they're not allowed to do
Wow.
that, and that I need to have a C-section, and who's my doctor. And I just was trying to be as strong as I could and speak in general terms. I didn't feel like I needed to give them my whole backstory. So I just left it at, I know my rights and I want to try to have a natural birth. And so they reluctantly, took me to my room. And luckily, the doctor that was on call was my original doctor that I was seeing in Santa Paula. And so
my
that was
gosh.
a pleasant
What luck was
surprise.
that?
Yeah. And she knew my situation. And so she was just like, okay, best of luck, labor on, and I'll come check on you, periodically. The county hospital is pretty small. I was sharing a bathroom with another birthing mom next door. And so I could hear her on the other side laboring. And then, I was going through my deal with my husband. And again, it was another long labor. It felt like, I did have him on the 5th, but it felt like another days on end. But I could feel my baby, like with the contractions, like it felt like he was trying to swim down or kick his way down. I swear I could feel that. And my doctor came in and she let me know that her shift was going to be ending soon, and that she can see that I was not progressing. If anything, I was regressing. I was getting very swollen, and for some reason I wasn't dilating. And she said, I'm happy to support you and be the one to do your C-section, or you're welcome to continue to labor. Your health is fine. The baby's health seems to be okay, so you can continue. I just don't know who's going to be here. And because I had grown, at one point to trust her and to appreciate her, I decided that I wanted her to do my C-section. So again, not an easy decision to make, but I was glad that it was with her. It was a different experience. I felt like at least I had tried and given myself and my baby that experience of a trial of labor. And for some reason, my body just wasn't cooperating, and it was okay to get some help. And we had another C-section, and I had asked her if Eli could again, name the sex of the baby when the baby came out. And she was so excited about that she did it. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. But it was fine. We were just happy, and we had another boy.
Yeah.
It wasn't as I wasn't as sad, I don't think, after, because I felt like I did what was within my control for the most part, and I tried my best, and at least I got to have that trial of labor and not just have the scheduled C-section that I didn't want. So yeah, that was, I had Ezzy, my second, and I was at the hospital for maybe a day or two. My C-section wound had opened at one point while I was in the Yeah, and so that was a little distressing. But I had a very kind nurse that helped, stop the bleeding. And other than that, I think things went pretty well. I was also really sick when I had Ezzy, with a cough and cold. And one of the nurses had suggested I wear a mask. And I'm like, I don't want my baby to know you with a mask on, but I did, just thinking I was protecting him from whatever I had.
Yeah.
So that was also a challenge. I don't know. I was hard on myself with all, stages of pregnancy, not necessarily, well, a little bit of pregnancy with Ezzy, my second born, because I felt like with Koa, I was so already bonded with him when he was in my belly, and just like, with Ezzy, I was like, had to like tune out that I was pregnant because I was so invested in having the feedback and learning about it and how to pursue it, and just like all these things that I had to do, and not just enjoy my pregnancy with him. And so that was also a hard part too. Like, I didn't even really know that it was happening, and necessarily, because I was just so busy. But I had some therapy at that time, and it was a really beautiful experience to be guided to, be gentle myself and connect with my baby. Um, so that was one thing that was challenging too, just feeling like I was missing out on just enjoying it. Like being pregnant with Koa was one of the most incredible times I've ever experienced in life. It was like the healthiest. I felt great and just so happy. And with Ezzy, I didn't have that in the first, I don't know, 5 months or so, until I started to have more of a plan and idea of what was happening. Then I felt like, okay, now I could just could try to bond with my baby and be connected.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about before we hit record is that you said how people can hear your story and learn what not to do.
Mm.
Do you want to share
Yeah.
some of the things that you've learned and some of the ways that people can learn from your story? And, we
Yeah.
all can look back on choices that we made and things that we did and realize if I would have known this then I would have done this.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I know, part of my healing process has been to just accept that you also don't know what you don't know until you're there, and
Wow.
so um, it's hard to just say like, at first I thought like, oh, I'm going to teach people what not to do, but you're not going to know until you're there, like what you're going to do or say or how you're going to react
Yeah.
and respond. But, some of the things that I would like people to take away is to listen to your heart and intuition. And, like I love my husband, and I know he had the best of intentions, as did my friend acting doula, with my first baby. But I really wanted midwives. I really wanted a doula. I really wanted a home birth. And I let concerns of other people, get in my head, and my hope for, okay, maybe the second one, I can have that experience, like feeling like, I don't know, just going with that and not going with my gut. I think that's something that I would like people to take away, is just to listen to what their heart says, and have good, knowledgeable experience support as well. Be patient. I know it's exciting, especially with your first, Um, yeah, just be patient and don't necessarily rush to the hospital because you're just so excited to see your baby. Again, I mean, my friend acting doula, she couldn't necessarily check my dilation and say, okay, you're ready to go to the hospital. My husband couldn't, so all I knew is what I thought, like what I felt ready. So again, yeah, that would have been great to have somebody at my house be like, nope, you got to chill here, stay home, walk around. Yeah, I just think having a supportive, knowledgeable providers in your corner would be really helpful. If somebody's pursuing a VBAC, I mean, I found you definitely to be super helpful, supportive. I mean, your classes and our conversations, and I'm so glad that you have this podcast now and you're going to be reaching out to even more people. And so, I mean, you just having so much support for us and, facts, because, we get family members who are scared or hear stories, it's illegal and, it's dangerous, ban. And, but then, with somebody like yourself who's done the research, and it's also good to have that to increase your confidence and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I want to mention when you talk about having a knowledgeable team on your side, one type of birth professional people can hire is a montrice. And montrices are often labor and delivery nurses, not necessarily so, who can check your dilation at home. So that way, before you head off to the hospital, if you're planning a hospital birth, you can have someone at your home with you who can help make sure that, you're not heading off to the hospital and you're 3 centimeters.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, the feedback that you got from your family is so common. It's like, well, the only reason why the hospital would ban VBAC is because it's so dangerous, right? And
Yeah.
so that can be a really huge thing to overcome. So how did the politics of VBAC impact your births?
Well, like I said, I wasn't able to birth at the hospital that I had. I mean, of course, my first was to birth at home, but at the hospital, I would have preferred, I wasn't able to do that. I would have been rejected or would have had to put up quite a fight. And, I mean, my family, yes, they had those concerns. Not everybody did, but, they did have those concerns. And so having to and I'm really close and I love my family, and so having to kind of come into contact with their fear, and not let it get to me, um,
Yeah.
and feel like, I mean, I wanted to educate them, but I didn't necessarily have all the knowledge either to change their minds about it. But in the end, I mean, everyone was pretty supportive, but it was a little bit challenging, like I said, to kind of keep that healthy boundary of not letting their fear influence me and my desire and my plan. And then, in hiring my midwives, they were faced with politics of their own. Apparently, they needed me to be transferred to a hospital, not just have a home birth. And so that affected me too, because ideally I would have liked to have experienced a home birth, but I had to get on board with, okay, if I want midwives, who are going to be helping me have a natural birth, at least, a vaginal birth, then I'll have to get on board and go to a hospital, even though I don't want to.
Yeah. So if you knew then what you know now, would you have made different choices?
Yeah, I think so. I would have probably gone with the Santa Barbara Birth Center initially and not looked back and not looked at other options. I mean, we had interviewed a couple of OB-GYNs here in Santa Barbara, and then ended up going with a former midwife who was in private practice. Now she had been working with the medical team at a clinic here in Santa Barbara. And because she was a midwife, nurse practitioner, I decided, okay, at least, yes, she's on this, team now at this clinic, but at least she has that background, so I'm going to go with her. The other person I had interviewed, being a first time parent and, hearing about making your birth plan and stuff, I just asked her a simple question, what are your thoughts or how do you work around, your patient's birth plans? And her response just rubbed me the wrong way. Well, I wouldn't go to your job and tell you how to do your life. And so it was just like, okay, well, that doesn't sound very supportive or validating. So, and this is a person I had heard of that was really great and supportive,
Yeah.
But I think I was going to say no to everybody because I also knew that I wanted that home birth. So in my mind, I was like, no, it's going to be good enough unless they're midwife,
Yeah.
So yeah, in
Yeah.
hindsight, I feel like I would have gone with the birth center and my team to support me and just dealt with the finances.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could have gotten my husband on board if I tried harder. It was weird though, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people could relate. At the time I wasn't working. And so I felt like, even though he was never withholding of money, like he was, the only earner. And so I felt just this internal, just like guilt about like, I don't have as much freedom to do what I want, because I'm
Yeah.
not contributing financially. And he never really said that, but it's just like something within myself. So again, in hindsight, I just
Yeah.
wished I had worked that out and just been a little bit like, no, this is my body. And this is what my body's telling me I want. And we'll figure it out.
Yeah. I think the thing that's so tough in that first pregnancy is that there's so much unknown, but I don't think a lot of people realize at the time how that first pregnancy plays out impacts your future births. And
Yeah.
it's really tough because if you have that C-section, now suddenly all these hospitals that would have been available to you to birth at are now suddenly unavailable to you. And how to plan your birth becomes substantially more complicated, or it can be, depending on what's available in your community. So, what would be your biggest tips to someone who wants to plan a VBAC?
I mean, definitely get to know you and read all your stuff and take your courses and, you know, um, definitely have somebody in their corner, their provider that is knowledgeable as well about VBAC and um, supportive of it. Obviously, it wasn't possible for me. I mean, I'm happy that I had the trial of labor for sure. But, there are so many success stories. It is possible. You don't have to feel like you're reinventing the wheel or that, you're
Yeah.
doing something so dangerous or like, unheard of. It happens and it's possible and it's safe. So I just want people to know that there's a lot of support out there and that it's possible.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you wish you knew when you were pregnant after your first cesarean?
A lot of things were out of my control again. I wish I would have known that,
Yeah.
the first doctor that I had as my backup, that she was going to be shortly told after that, that you're not going to be able to do this, you're going to get fired. Because, I mean, I would have still loved to have gone with her, but if I had known that I was going to have to like start over again,
Yeah.
I probably would have not gone with her. Had I known that my doctor, was going to be busy at another hospital that he couldn't support me at. Like that was never told to me. It was
Yeah.
always, well, I'll meet you at St. John's. I'll be there. You got this. It was never like, there might be a possibility that I might be at another hospital and can't get to you. In my recollection, anyway. If it did, it just was so out of my mind, like, that's not going to happen. So, had I know all that was possibly going to happen, I mean, I don't know. I probably would have even been willing to just go down to LA and just not even mess with all these, obstacles, in my way here. I would have just been like, if UCLA is my best bet, then let's just go there. And, yes, it would be nice to have had, my baby at the hospital I was born at, my husband and his brother, or down the street from my, beautiful cousin's beautiful home where I was able to labor at, it would have been easy. But obviously none of that happened. So yeah, I just wish I would have just gone with something that was a kind of more of a guarantee, that I wouldn't have to go in and fight for my right, be judged. And I mean, I don't know, could have happened there too. I don't know. I've heard more kind of success stories and supportive stories of people that have gone there. So probably just would have avoided all these obstacles and gone down there. Or again, like, I don't know why necessarily my midwives didn't want me to go with Dr. Fishbein, but, I kind of wish I would have gone with that gut feeling too, and having him try to help her. But I don't know, maybe I would have had to be transferred to the hospital because my body didn't cooperate. But again, I don't know why my body didn't cooperate. Maybe it was, these external things like the interventions I had with COA or, you know, just not being in a very supportive environment while I was laboring.
Yeah.
I ended up being in one, but at first, like having to be faced with that fear.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll never know, I guess.
Yeah. So, how do your two births impact you today, if at all?
When I read that question, I was like, kind of like all the other ones. I was just like, oh yeah, I can answer that without crying. I'm fine. But then when I got to that one, I was just like, I'm obviously still very emotional, and I don't know if that goes away. I mean, but I still feel like I probably have a lot of healing I need to do around my births because I'm so vulnerable. I kind of think like when it's one of those things, like if it's not on my mind, I'm not thinking about it, I feel like I'm fine, but when I'm asked to appear on a podcast, which I'm happy to be doing, but I'm happy to kind of revisit it all, like comes back up.
Yeah.
So it impacts my emotional well-being and my mental health, I think. It impacts my relationship with my boys, I think. But it's more like my stuff that I need to work out, I think, because I am critical of myself still sometimes. And I wonder, like, gosh, did I ruin my boys? Did I harm them? Did my choices, are they going to have long-term impact on my children? They're beautiful, healthy boys, challenging boys. Oftentimes asking myself that, my oldest, he has a hard time, sometimes transitioning and being out and doing new things, and he so had a hard time, like, coming out of me, and so I just relate a lot of like his personality to his birth experience. And, I had to learn that I don't like being late. But I am oftentimes rushing. I know that when I'm rushing him, like, it doesn't help things. It makes things more challenging. And so sometimes I think back to his birth, like, gosh, I rushed him. I was at the hospital or had my water broke and he wasn't ready. And now, I don't know, I'm a little bit more patient, let him go through his process and stuff as get ready. But before I would kind of feel like I was doing that in real life, let's go, we gotta go. And it would just get him anxious and worked up and wouldn't help things. And so yeah, I would say that's how it impacts me, is just my critic, my self-critic, and my mental and emotional health. But I've also, through support from people like you and people from ICANN that I've met and through therapy, I've learned to also just kind of make peace with it and accept it. And um, there's somebody that came up to me after, I think it was the panel that I was on, and I still had so much guilt, and with COA, like I was forcing him, and I just should have been more patient. And uh, she had helped me have like a different perspective on it, and how it was maybe even just like relieving for both of us, and it was okay to get that help, and so just rather than being so hard on myself and seeing like I did something wrong or bad, or, I didn't do it the right way, like seeing his C-section as it was okay. And we just both needed a little bit of help in my medical care now. Even though I'm not having babies, I still don't want to see a gynecologist. I don't know. I just feel like I wasn't able to be supported by anybody here, in my time of pregnancies for what I wanted. And so that just put a sour taste in my mouth. And I just haven't really wanted to go back for any treatment. I do have, my primary care physician who's a woman. And so I do get, my annual stuff done. I'm taking care of myself. But yeah, I just have like bitterness in my heart, I think, towards some of the medical providers. And of course, I would go if I needed to, And, in the beginning, too, when the hospital had their VBAC ban, I was pretty active with ICANN at that time. And, I participated in protests, and the panels. And so, yeah, it's impacted me in that way, too, just to kind of fire me up and, want to make a change and a difference. I haven't been as active since having my boys and since starting my career and stuff. But it did impact me in that way as well. Just want to make a difference and do something.
Yeah. I've heard that Cottage has since reversed their VBAC ban. Are you aware of that? Do you have any thoughts about that? Have you seen that maybe making a difference in terms of VBAC access in your community?
Yeah, like I said, I am a little bit out of touch with the birthing community now, but I did see that they made that claim, I don't know, I want to say maybe a year or more ago. And it was almost like I have to see it to believe it kind of things, because they still were like, yes, we're going to reverse this ban, but we need to get the proper staff in line still, in order to do that. And so I don't know if they have all their ducks in a row now and that they're totally open and able to do it, or not. But I think it's awesome if people are able to go there and pursue a VBAC. I think it's great. I think it's a long time coming. And it also angers me a little bit too, like it happened too late, for me anyway, so sometimes I get that side of it too, just like, again, like it would have been so awesome to birth my babies at the same hospital Dad and I were born at, just like that would have been such a cool story. And so there's that part that's a little bitter, but then again, just like super stoked for like the parents of today, that get to go there and be supported, hopefully, and have that opportunity that they have a right to.
Yeah. What's the most important thing that you want parents to hear from your story?
It's a good question. Hard one. I think being like open to having important conversations with one another about around childbirth. I know people do, but for the partner that isn't pregnant, to just really validate what the pregnant partner is experiencing and wanting, be open to it. Do a little work around, even if it's not feeling right for you as a partner, I think it's worth doing some work around like, well, let's explore it at least and let's see what are the possibilities. What would it entail? And just kind of waver out those pros and cons and just make sure that the pregnant one of the two feels heard, supported. I don't know. I mean, people give birth every day, and I think that we take it for granted. And we think people do this every day. My body's going to know what to do. That could be true in many cases where it's easy, and but in some cases it's not so clear cut. And so just to know that and to be more open to, discussing that with one another. And if, a natural birth is what you're looking for, or vaginal birth after C-section, like I've mentioned many times before already, be open to hiring people that can help you along that journey. And so it would be a good investment for your emotional well-being and your whole journey, I think, your process of labor, birth, and pregnancy.
And when you think about birth professionals hearing your story, is there anything you would like them to take away from your experience?
I know that they're very knowledgeable about their field. They see it day in and day out. They're the experts. They have lots of experience. And I know some of them are able to do this, but just remember that we're all individual people. We all have different journeys and, different hopes. And so just to really hone into us and not think about like the big picture of, this is what I do for a living. I know what I'm doing kind of thing. And I don't know, like cookie cutter us, like everyone's different. And just to really take time to hear your patients and let them be seen and feel heard, validated, even if it's something that we don't agree with, just be open to hearing them and not shutting them down. And I know they're busy and I know they have their agendas and their procedures and all that, but just remember this is not their, 100th time, just like it's yours, this is maybe their first or second, and each birth could be really different. And so just to be more empathetic, maybe, and open-hearted.
And I also think about policymakers who could be hearing your story. Is there anything you would like to say or anything you'd like policymakers to know relative to midwifery and VBAC or hospital VBAC policies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to really have a lot of knowledge around this topic. You have so many helpful facts that a lot of policymakers don't necessarily know, and so I just really hope that they would take the time to educate themselves about what surrounds midwifery and what surrounds VBACs and take that into consideration when they are deciding on policies to implement or to change, but as opposed to maybe, well, this has been around for a long time, or, this obviously had a purpose. So let's just go along with it. There's so much talk about reproductive rights right now in our country and abortion, and how we should have the right to make our own decisions. And I think the same could be said about VBACs. So I guess that's another desire of mine, to have this be just as loud and important, because it does entail our bodies and our rights.
Well, I agree with you, and that is why I continue to do this work. And that's why I launched this podcast, was to reach a new audience so that way we can have more people, whether they are parents, professionals, policymakers, or the court, be knowledgeable about this topic. So when it comes up for them, when they're presented with the opportunity to share an opinion or provide information, they're in a well-informed position to do so.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share today?
I thought it was interesting that this was the day that we are doing this podcast, because on my memories on my social media came up was a women's march that I participated in when Trump was in office the first time. And I stood along with another mother and Anastasia Stone as she spoke out against, the rights of women who are being violated here in our own town, here in Santa Barbara, those that want to pursue VBAC at that time when there was a ban. So I just wanted to say that was kind of fitting to be this day that you and I are meeting.
Yeah. And the fight continues.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Denise.
Of course. Thank you for your time and for everything that you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And until next time, I'm Jen Camel. This is the VBAC Facts Podcast. Be well and take care. Bye.
Bye.